The Daleks in colour. A rather controversial release. So despite the mixed reputation on the topic, what do I, as a 1960s fan, my favourite era of the show by the way, think of this? I think colorizing 60s episodes is fine.
You're a traitor to the 60s era.
Will you shut up? None of that shit here. None of that here. This is just an interesting curiosity piece. Because at the end of the day, you're not forced to buy it, aren't you? So, and it doesn't remove the original black and white episode. So chill for just 2 minutes. I think some stories would be fascinating in colour. I personally would like to see the Romans, the War Machines, Enemy of the World, and the Mind Robber get the treatment. On the other side, I feel colorization would detract their atmosphere, like the Web of Fear. Stories with a similar setting kill the story. So that's really my thoughts on colorizing 60 stories. It simply depends on the story. I see no point in just saying no to it. It's an interesting curiosity piece. Now with that out of the way, this is not a review on the story. If I was to review the story, I would look at the original 1960s episode. I'm talking about the delivery and the execution of the release. Not only is it colorized, but the duration is shorter, running at 70 minutes. And the story has been given a more modernized approach to target the audience of modern day fans to get into the classic 60s stories. So yes, that is the target demographic. I'm not sure if that's the main demographic that have picked this release up. I don't have that data obviously to break down who bought the release. Curious 1960s fans like me, or modern fans who have never even touched the classic era. And I would find the latter option to be a little unbelievable, and I don't think that would be the main target that are buying this release personally to me. So, I'm about to watch the Daleks in colour. Back in a jiff. Well then, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the Daleks in colour, let's just start with the colorization first. I think it was done well. Some scenes I would say go a bit over the top in terms of the colorization, especially lighting. And now, colorization not being near as tedious to do with the advancements of software capabilities, literally anyone can with very low experience in animation. It did turn out to be a very interesting experience to watch a 60s black and white episode in colour. But the problem is literally everything else. Yeah, it's going to be one of those videos. Yeah, it's going to be one of those. Yeah, this is not a good start to begin this trend. And in fact, now, it's quite the statement to make, and I don't believe it's true, but it's definitely heading in that direction if they don't, if they follow the format. They might have killed the colorization trend. I'm not even making that up. It really is. Despite me taking a jab at these anti-colorization people, the release was, in places, just horrible. This release and how it was put together editing-wise was shocking. Some scenes, I will admit, come down to complete subjectivity. But the others, it's no question it was pretty terrible. And I mean shoddy editing. I don't like doing these types of videos. It happened with the original Underwater Menace, Daleks Genesis of Terror last year, and now we have this. Some things that were added I admit I did like. The opening theme tune and modernization of the music score is one of those points where it comes down to complete subjectivity. Despite the original soundtrack being perfection and establishing the atmosphere, the tense, bleak and the depressing war-infested relics on the Dalek City and the petrified forest were just reinforced by the original music score, and to make the story more fast-paced. But I feel that this is detracting from one of the best elements the original Dalek story has, its atmosphere. Now, is it good and wise to compare it to the original Relic the original story of the Daleks to this, yes, I think it is good to compare them and not just look at this as just a standalone thing. But I can see where the editing team tried to work with this one. They wanted to completely just take out the context of An Unearthly Child and everything that preceded before it in terms of story, character development. It was just all pretty much, not all of it, but most of it was removed. Which I feel in doing that, it looks like what the BBC did was perform a Mortal Kombat fatality on the Daleks, ripped its soul out, and left a soulless release. I know that sounds pretty horrible to call this release soulless. That's what it feels like to me. It's like everything that was good about it was just ripped out and just left with a soulless, colorized story. Again, I think some of the additions were good, and then the things which I love about the Daleks was just ripped out. And then that gives the question, why did they just not colorize the whole thing? It's because that was against their target demographic. But like I said, I appreciate some of the new scenes and the animated sequences. That's all well and good. And the black and white transition to colour in the first 20 seconds. And I thought that was a cool transition. But some scenes were just silly, like this one.
Not on Earth.
No, certainly not.
Ian, where are we?
I don't know.
The Doctor literally just said in the background they ain't on Earth, and then Barbara proceeds to tell Ian, where are they? That scene just makes Barbara look like she has 5-second memory. So yeah, dialogue is spliced and put into different parts of the story, like in the context that is said in the background. So that scene alone was just so silly. It made Barbara look like she had terrible memory. The Doctor literally just told you that they're not on Earth. Now, with the Daleks, one of the best attributes, as I said, being the atmosphere, I would say in this modernised version, the atmosphere in the beginning, it's still there. It's present for the most part, but then it's just completely killed off. One of the best elements of the Daleks, completely exterminated. The pun was 100% intended. Started off okay, the atmosphere was still present, but then gone. More context was removed, like Susan seeing someone in the jungle and people not taking Susan seriously. That was completely removed. Which goes on from my main points, the story soul was ripped out of it. Despite the little character developments the 60s did with their companions, I just think this was a negative move to make. And I don't think this is even the best depiction to even give the modern audience anyway. Because it makes Susan just have, from the little character development she had, to just completely nothing. All of it's removed, and I think that was just a bad idea, but I know it can be difficult to splice it down to a specific length to target your demographic. I think, personally, the demographic was wrong, and they should have just viewed it as just a curiosity piece. And without all this editing, but that's just for me, and not every release can be designed just for me. So if they want to go down that direction and target only, well not only, but modern audiences who haven't experienced Classic Who, then fair enough. But I still don't think it's the best depiction of it. And that is despite the terrible execution and delivery it has in places. Now, I don't think this story works for someone who has already experienced the original Dalek episode. I think this story would just simply annoy you or frustrate you. What the BBC tried to do is to make a story designed to be a slow-paced story originally that is heavily built on its atmosphere and character relationships into a fast-paced story with its atmosphere and character relationships removed. The extra music score and the editing is responsible for removing that atmosphere. Having too much music can have a regressive effect on atmosphere and completely kill it. So I don't think this release is very well designed for that target demographic as well. And I think a curiosity piece for classic fans is just as important for the target demographic as modern audiences getting into this story. So they focus too much on one side and not the other, which I think limits the ability for people to be interested in the colorizations moving forward. but that's just my view of it. And when it comes to quite shoddy editing, the part of the fluid link being removed from the TARDIS by the Doctor, which prevents the TARDIS from moving, isn't very well implied. Really strange, terrible edit cut, and it doesn't convey that at all. So how would modern audiences even know that was happening? The splice was just so abrupt, and it doesn't convey that at all. So how are they supposed to know if they never watched the story? And I've watched the story and the original, and if that was my first time experiencing that, I wouldn't even known that took place. We have additional Dalek voices too, and I think this is, well, to me, a pointless addition. Besides replacing the dialogue with something different, it's completely subjective. I feel it wasn't entirely needed, but the additional mechanical sound effects, that was a nice touch. And this release as well relies on a lot of flashback cut sequences to establish prior scenes like the anti-radiation drugs and the neutron bomb. I really like the neutron bomb because it almost played out as like flashbacks of the war, and that really delivered the atmosphere of what happened on Skaro. That really worked for me, but then the atmosphere was completely killed off 15 minutes later, so it's like, oh shit, that's annoying. But then when the TARDIS team are escaping the Dalek city, the music, it turns into like a 1980s heist movie. With the editing, it literally looks, if you've watched 1980s heist movies, it was literally like edited like that. It was such a weird idea. And it's the only part of the story where it has that. It's so contrived and jarring when I first experienced that, because at least in the beginning it had its atmosphere, and then you're doing something like that, you just need to pick one narrative and one pace and just go with it. Did it flawlessly in establishing a slow-paced, atmospheric story. Here, yeah, I think most people commented on that part of the story. Yeah, it didn't do it for me whatsoever. Though, in the Dalek city when they're escaping, to see Ian's point of view inside the Dalek, that was a nice addition. Because yeah, I've admitted to this, it has nice additions to expand the story. It's almost like it played, I don't think this was the intention, but almost like it played homage to the novelization, because the novelization was done in Ian's point of view. But I don't think that was the intention why they did it. But hey, whatever it was, I liked that. So it's like a blend of some additional parts were really good, but then others, it was shoddy as hell. So this release is all over the place. And to criticise the original story, it struggled with pacing issues in episode 5 and 6. And you would think cutting it down would support it. It really doesn't, and yeah, it really kills it. The worst thing about this, and I'm not sure anyone else has had this problem, but I did. Sometimes the music was so unbelievably loud that I struggled to hear the dialogue. It was being drowned out. Are you having a laugh? That's basic editing problems. That's like me in 2013 editing my first video. Did anyone have a problem with that? Because this happened later in the episode. The music was drowning out the audio from the characters speaking. That is probably, besides the heist sequence, which I thought was just contrived and very jarring, that was the part of the release where I said to myself, this release is very shoddy in places. I don't expect that. That's like Underwater Menace reconstruction levels of terrible, that is. Don't pull an Underwater Menace on me again. Flippin' hell, I do not want PTSD from that. Don't release shoddy releases, BBC, and then expect people's hard-earned money to pay for it. No, I'm not having it. But let's call it here. It's not as shoddy as the Underwater Menace reconstruction. Let's just get that out right now and say that. It's not as bad, okay? It's not a repeat. The fouls were unfortunately terrible too. They turned them from an interesting race you cared for soulless individuals with their characters completely removed. It's not here. The ending scenes of attacking the city went from having pacing problems in the original from being completely rushed, literally one extreme to the next. But yeah, the fouls, you could, if this is your first time experiencing this story, in this format, then, well, you really do not give an F about the fouls whatsoever. In the original you did, but here, oh, whatever. Okay. This sentence for me encapsulates, this is my opinion, removing everybody's voices out of the equation. This is what I think of the Daleks in colour. This is a soulless version of the Daleks. Its soul has been ripped out and just turned into a rather... I don't know what word to describe it. Besides soulless. It's such a horrible word, but it's the only word I can think of it to describe it. A soulless, modernized version of it. Yeah. I think that's all I can say about it. It's the only word that's come into my head. Soulless. I ain't coming back to this release. I'm not sure about anyone else. I've watched it and that's it. I don't think this is the replayability on it is high at all. But this release wasn't meant for me, and that's fine. The problem, there's many problems with it. I think the target demographic, it is fine, but they've alienated a part of the demographic, and I think that would be quite a large demographic, and which will alienate future colorizations, and I think it will affect the sales if this is the treatment it gets moving forward. It's not just that, the editing and delivery is simply poor, and I'm not going to let my view of just some additional scenes which I liked distract me from that. It was a very poorly executed release. This is a trend that the BBC and the Doctor Who space was to begin. Colorizing black and white stories, and originally I was very interested. It's quite the statement to make. The BBC could have actually killed it. I don't think it's fully dead at the moment, and I think there might be a release or two coming up. I'm sure of it, but there was talks for the War Games. Flipping out, do not butcher the War Games. I will lose my shit if they mess that up, because so much context in each episode. Oh, I can't. I dread that. I absolutely dread it if they do the War Games and give it that treatment. Don't mess up my favourite story. Yep, this started as a curiosity piece to a soulless version of the story. That's how I'm going to close off this video. Harsh? Yeah. Yeah, it's harsh. Do I recommend it? No. No, I don't. It would be interesting to see fans' opinions in the comments who have watched the modern version of it but never experienced the original story. Be interesting to see those people put comments, because that was the target demographic after all, but I don't know if they've achieved it. I really don't. Yeah, just give the black and white version a chance. Pick up the beginning box set. That's my recommendation. This is a soulless version of the Daleks.